When I was trying to figure out what the main point of this video was going to be, I narrowed it down to 2 words: RPGs and small. Pokemon Blue version was my very first RPG ever, and while it may not be my absolute favorite Pokemon game nowadays, I don't think we should ever understate or downplay why it appealed to people like me so much. There's no real objective list of everything an RPG has to do, but the one thing Pokemon does absolutely right is planting the seeds of curiosity to explore. Even in this game's comparatively small virtual worlds, you will always find some kind of joy in discovering something or some place for the first time. This is something that would continue to stick with me as I started to delve even deeper into the genre. I was pretty sheltered growing up, so there weren't a ton of opportunities for me to go on adventures, so to speak, but it was through playing RPGs that I was able to appreciate just walking around places when I did become older with more agency, even just for the atmosphere. Whether it's on a hike with a friend, meandering around the mall, or even the airport. I just love taking it all in. But something that I've noticed with newer RPGs, or games in general really, is that their worlds are so much bigger. Sure, there's plenty of room for meaningful exploration, but it can get pretty overwhelming at times. It doesn't have that same quaint feeling of older RPGs where the worlds manage to still feel grand despite their compact size. Speaking of smaller in size, that brings us to the real topic of this video: the Gamecube. The Gamecube was physically smaller in size than something like the Xbox or the fat PS2 model. That made it pretty portable and easy to bring to a friend's house. The discs were also smaller. And of course, so was the GameCube's library of RPGs. Now granted, you had the Game Boy player, which basically allowed you to play your Game Boy and Game Boy Advance RPGs through your GameCube. Maybe by that logic you could argue there wasn't really an urgent need for GameCube exclusive RPGs. Nonetheless, the GameCube isn't really known for any of its RPGs. Hell, the only thing I really know that console for was Mario, Zelda, and Super Smash Bros. Melee, which contains characters from both Mario and Zelda. God damn it! So out of sheer curiosity, I decided to find and sample some of the GameCube's RPGs. And let me tell you, there was not a lot to work with. If you Google GameCube RPGs, you're met with a whole ton of results that hardly even qualify as RPGs, at least in my eyes. There are games like Zatch Bell, Mamodo Fury that don't feel like an RPG at all, but they have a stat distribution mechanic, so close enough. Or you could play my favorite RPG, Beyblade Super Tournament Battle.
This is a powerful look at the sharp flash! It's touch and go!
Wait, this game looks awesome. Maybe I should have played it. They'll have like 1 or 2 RPG aspects attached to them, and they'll be labeled as an RPG. Other, more qualified games were already out on all the 6th gen consoles when they came out anyway, so bringing those up would kind of be a moot point. Now, I know game genres are pretty nebulous nowadays, but for the purposes of this video, I'm gonna try to cover RPGs that were at least initially GameCube exclusive upon first release. This is before taking into account any remasters that came out later down the line. For the ones that have been remastered, hey, now's your chance to give them a try. Those of them that haven't been yet, I don't know, learn to use Dolphin Emulator or something. Alright, so I know Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door is probably the most well-known one on this list. I've been told that out of all the Paper Mario games, this one is the best apparently. I only played about an hour of it, so all I can really say is that I like the aesthetic. I like how every battle takes place on a literal stage and the audience being an actual mechanic is a thing. Not sure how I feel about every single attack being some type of mini QuickTime event. Hell, even analyzing the enemy is a timed thing. Maybe I'll play more of the game later on a live stream or something to get a better feel for it. For now, I will defer to my friend JP, who recently made a video on all the Mario RPGs. Go check it out. It's unique, for sure, and I want you to keep that word in mind for the rest of this video, because this will be a running trend. Except for the next game I'm talking about. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is known for having pretty bad games, so this shouldn't come as too big of a surprise to you. So all I did was search for Gamecube RPGs when I found this game. I saw screen caps of Yu-Gi-Oh! Monsters in turn-based combat, and I thought, hey, if the shoe fits. The premise of the game is the main character getting stuck inside a virtual world where Yugi is the leader of a rebellion against the attacking empire. Okay, so it's a tactical RPG? Well, it's a bit more complicated than that. Yu-Gi-Oh! The Falsebound Kingdom is a real-time strategy game with turn-based encounters. The gameplay is extremely slow. Not only that, but battles only last a couple turns, and it takes at least 3 scuffles to defeat an enemy unit. And every time you don't finish them off, you gotta watch those little guys bounce off each other and then keep bashing their heads together until one of them falls. There's really nothing too special about it as far as I could tell from the first couple stages. The only reason you'd really play this game is because you like Yu-Gi-Oh! And that's perfectly fine. Continuing down the trend of childhood games that I experienced the anime first for, we have Pokemon Colosseum. This game also has a sequel called Pokemon XD. Can we all just appreciate that for a second? Despite getting into Pokemon when I was a kid, I never got around to playing this game until recently. I didn't own a GameCube, but I had a Wii. Theoretically, I could have still played this game, but because I never had a GameCube, it follows that I never had the GameCube controller to play GameCube games on my Wii. You know that phase in your life when all of your peers you used to enjoy Pokemon with sorta turn on you? They make a huge 180 turn and start making fun of you for liking Pokemon because that stuff's for little babies. Bitch, you're the same age as the main character, I don't wanna hear it. I remember being told this by my childhood friends, but the one exception they made for this rule, for some unknown reason, was Pokemon Colosseum. After getting to know the game a little, there could have been several factors that played into that. Every battle being a double battle and the difficulty being overall harder than the other games is one, but I don't think our kid brains were really thinking too much about that back then. The premise is definitely edgier, and I'm more inclined to believe that's the reason. This is Pokemon for the big kids, the Pokemon that your dad can't handle. You play as a rogue ex-member of an evil organization who steals Pokemon and fills their hearts with darkness. Now it's up to you to steal back those Pokemon and restore their hearts. The Kingdom Hearts parallels are all over the wall. This game even has Riku in it. Honestly, a really fun concept for a Pokemon game. Does that make it more mature than the other games though? No, not really. I know I just called this game edgy, but it's nothing over the top or shocking. It's largely the same song and dance. We're beating an evil team. Sure, we're stealing from people, but the game does a pretty good job justifying it. The most interesting thing about Colosseum isn't that it's dark. It's purely in its battles and team building. You do not catch wild Pokemon in this game. You are limited to only catching and using the Shadow Pokemon you encounter in trainer battles. Shadow Pokemon need to regain all their moves and empty their heart gauges before they can really do anything. And even then, you have to purify them afterwards so their experience points will actually be applied to them. Boss trainers may use Pokemon that pair well with each other, and that leads you to also think about what Pokemon on your side have good synergy. The only downside is that the battle animations are kinda slow, and can get pretty repetitive during some of the longer and harder battles. The way I played this game was through a custom build of the Dolphin emulator that allows me to double the game speed without speeding up or desyncing the audio. Don't worry, this is the only game where I did this, and honestly, it might not even be necessary. I'm just impatient because my previous save file isn't on this computer, so I had to start from the beginning. The setting is also probably one of my favorites. The Ore region is apparently based on Phoenix, Arizona, the real first region to be based on an American setting. But that's not the reason I like it, obviously. I just like the really peaceful little oasis-like towns juxtaposed by the grittier cities where the police do basically nothing. Ah shit, this really is based on America. And finally, you have your futuristic laboratories and technology of the underground city. Again, these settings are all small in comparison to the scale of most RPGs even at the time, actually, but they were still fun to just be around. Adventure isn't all about the grand scale of things. I think that's the one thing we've all sort of forgotten nowadays. And we'll be holding on to that mentality as we move on to our next game. Now, this is the game that filled me with the most childlike wonder when I played it. Game literally starts off with a Disney-esque musical number. Thank you, I cried. The story premise also feels very innocent and fairy tale-like. You're a young traveler on a journey to extract myrrh from these special trees to keep your crystal meth from losing its power. Every town keeps a crystal to protect themselves from a miasma that covers the planet, and will drain people's life force away after prolonged contact with it. You're given the choice to name your town, choose your tribe, and your family trade. You receive letters from your family while on your travels and are even given the option to send back a gift in return. Just an overall wholesome and cozy vibe. The gameplay is also just as simple and lax. You can either smack things, hold the A button down to smack them even harder, or aim your magic at enemies. Spells are something you have to find in the stage and equip, and you lose them at the end of the stage, or dungeon, whatever you want to call it. You don't really gain experience points like you would in most RPGs, rather you find these relics in chests throughout the level, and after you beat the stage, you select one of the relics you found to receive a stat increase associated with that relic. This game was also meant to be played with friends, but I don't have any. Pretty much every aspect of this game I've discussed so far does emit a very nostalgic energy. Maybe it's the presence of a caring family checking up on you from time to time. Maybe it's the art style. Maybe it's the really innocent plot. Maybe because it was meant to be enjoyed amongst family and friends. Once again, the dungeon design is pretty small in scale, continuing with our trend here. It's nothing too exciting, but I wouldn't call it boring either. You really do feel like a kid going on a hiking trail. The linear path very neatly loops back into itself. Except here you open those paths back up by unlocking gates you couldn't get through earlier. But hey, I like when dungeons do that. Oh pish posh, get out of here with that mushy stuff already. When are we gonna get to an RPG with a serious story? Look, what do you want me to do? Shin Megami Tensei isn't on the Gamecube. What do you mean you don't know what SMT is? Just go watch this video I made and find out. And while I'm shilling myself, I might as well shout out my Patreon too. Toss me $1. I'll make it worth your while. If you want to donate more, you can, but it's not at all necessary. Alright, this game probably lines up more with what people think of RPGs. Epic anime-ass opening FMV, and a huge world-trotting adventure to fulfill some prophecy and defeat the corrupt empire or something. Tales of Symphonia is about as JRPG as you can get. It should be noted that this game did technically have a PS2 release, but that was in Japan only, so as far as the rest of the world is concerned, it was a GameCube exclusive before it was later remastered. The GameCube version is also the only one to run at 60 FPS. The PS2 version ran at 30 FPS and the remasters were based on the PS2 version. I know all other versions have some extra content, but there are very few instances where that kind of thing really matters to me. And I think all of them are Pokemon, and Final Fantasy IV. The thing that interested me the most, however, was the combat. It's not turn-based, it's a hack-and-slash battle system where you assign skills to a control stick direction while pressing the B button. Your party members, aside from the one you're actively controlling of course, have very diverse AI settings to take advantage of. I honestly have no complaints about the party AI from what I've played so far. To be honest, controlling the characters yourself takes more getting used to. I tried setting the battle difficulty to hard mode just to see what it was like, and yeah, it's hard. You know, despite this being more akin to a grander scale RPG adventure, the beginning portion of the game really does have that small nostalgic feel that a lot of other games I've talked about have so far. It all starts with a group of friends from this small village. The first dungeon is a singular block pushing puzzle. The protagonist's house is just through a nearby forest, which is also treated like a little mini dungeon. Dude, look at this man's house. This is the type of house every kid wanted. This is the type of house you built in Minecraft. It really does settle you into the small town life before flipping your world upside down and excommunicating you from your starting village. This is where your journey truly begins, and also where I stop for this video. I was never really super interested in Fire Emblem. I'm not much of a tactical RPG guy, but after playing the first 5 chapters in Path of Radiance, I think I might have become Fire Emblem pilled. Maybe, we'll see. The game starts off with you sparring with your dad. Naturally, you start at opposite sides of the field and move towards each other in a grid-like fashion. Look, my dad and I take LARPing very seriously.
So my friend decided to try and use a necromancer spell, which didn't work, which I knew it wouldn't. And apparently we contaminated the crime scene because that spell uses a lot of glitter.
I do like how you play as a bunch of mercenaries caught in the middle of a war between 2 kingdoms. Even though they pretty much always end up doing the good guy thing to do, the characters all very much rationalize it in terms of what's in their best interest from a business perspective. Except Ike, he's a hero through and through. The game is very beginner friendly. Every time a new mechanic is introduced, you have this option to watch or skip the tutorial. If you need a refresher, you always have access to them from the menu. For a lot of the no-duh type of stuff, I just skipped it, but the few that I've watched were actually helpful. The tutorial girl Anna is just a joy to listen to. The way she talks comes off extremely human and less like a tutorial robot type character. Like, this is how your nutty Fire Emblem friend would explain how the mechanics work to you. We stan Anna. Characters being able to use 2 weapon types is pretty based for any RPG. Honestly, just an overall fun time, not much else to be said. The screenshots for this game I saw online made it look really unappealing. I almost decided not to play it just for that. It just looked like some card game. Looking up footage of the game, however, I was glad to see that that wasn't the case. You see, Baten Kaitos does not play like an actual card game, thankfully. It's just a turn-based RPG with cards as your attack spells and items this time. Honestly, looking at it from that angle, it bears a strong resemblance to this concept art of Kingdom Hearts Chain of Memories, back when it was originally planned to be turn-based. Man, imagine a universe where that happened. My only real issue with this combat system is that the cards you draw will be in a random order, so some turns you'll just have no armor cards or not have the right weapon cards to parry attacks with. This can still happen even if you balance your deck really well. There are unique quirks about the game that I do enjoy quite a bit, however. In this game, you don't earn money by slaying enemies, and selling your cards isn't really worth much. The way you earn gold is by taking photos of enemies. There are things to take into account like balancing a light spell with a dark spell so that the picture isn't too bright, and vice versa. This is just one example. Experience points alone won't level you up. You have to go to the church and reflect on your experience to grow. One of the interesting things about this game's story is that the main character, Callus, actively acknowledges the player. You are assigned the role of his guardian spirit. He'll often ask you questions and you'll be prompted to give a response. It's like some Blue's Clues shit, except some demonic forces are at play, and I'm all for it. The floating continent is also a nice setting. I know plenty of other games have done it, but I've always been a fan of that type of setting. Maybe it's because I played Final Fantasy III a few times during my early teens. I don't know. Oh, but we're not done with the card games yet. Okay, not gonna lie, this game is pretty rad. I'm liking it more than I thought I would. Now, I've never played a FromSoft game before this one, but I turned around on that pretty quickly once I booted up Lost Kingdoms. I don't really know how to describe it, but the whole uncanny look that some of these older FromSoft games have, it's kinda grown on me really fast. It's a game about a black fog that's been covering the land, and anyone who goes into the fog never comes out! You play as a princess looking for her father, the king, who went to investigate said fog. I think the unsettling look of the models and level assets are befitting for that type of premise. The camera only being able to point in 4 set directions is kinda bordering fixed camera angles, but I don't mean that in a bad way. It gives you enough to work with, but still keeping that tiny bit of uncertainty what's ahead. I can't imagine some of these levels looking nearly as intimidating if you could just point the camera straight down the path. It really sets the atmosphere for this game. The tutorial level is the least oppressive thing in this game, but at the same time, you're being followed around by this funny little teleporting witch as she explains the heart of the cards to you or whatever. She just fucking chaos controlled right in front of me. You got these goblin enemies who attack by farting on you. What the fuck? I really developed a love for games that constantly teeter between unabashedly weird and quirky to dark and gritty. Oh, that's not even getting into the card system. This game is the only one on this list to have step-based random encounters instead of randomly spawned ones on the field. The rippling water effect of the battle transition is super clean and honestly fits really well for some of the more unsettling levels. Like, I actually feel a little bit anxious by what's about to attack me. The chunk of the level you're standing in just straight up becomes the arena for the encounter. That's very dynamic for a game of its time. It really does make the transition between level and battles more seamless. Your entire deck in this game is literally
Draw! Monster Cardo!
But monsters are different types, have different element attributes, and cost a different amount of rock candy. Some monsters are used like weapons with limited use. Some monsters act as familiars on the field. Some monsters are like Final Fantasy summons, and they just come in for an attack or healing animation, then spawn you back in. Don't get too careless though, once a card is used up, you will not get it back until after you clear the level. I found this out the hard way and decked out during the graveyard boss. No way of damaging the boss or getting my cards back. You'd think the game would just boot me out of the level as soon as I'm out of cards, but no. I had to manually exit the level. At least they had an option for that. Unlike Baten Kaitos, this game gives you the option to drop cards and draw another. If your hand isn't very good for your current situation, this is a nice option. I can see some people finding this gameplay repetitive, but honestly, I don't personally have that many issues with it. I like the combat. I dig being able to see different monster summons when I get a new card. I like the decision making the card mechanics impose on the player. Does this card have the elemental advantage over the enemy? I need to time this monster summoning animation just right so that it lands the hit. I gotta think carefully about how much I'm using up my cards. It's not a 10 out of 10 game by any means, but not every game has to be excellent to be special. I guess that brings me to my final point. I know there are other RPGs on the GameCube I could have talked about, however most of them are either also on the PS2, in which case why not just buy the PS2, it's got all the RPGs on it, or ports of Dreamcast games such as Evolution Wars or Skies of Arcadia. I kind of want to save those for a potential Dreamcast video if I ever make one, so I'll hold my tongue on those games for now. I'm sure most of you have noticed that none of the RPGs I've covered here are outstandingly amazing or anything like that. Though I do see a lot of potential in Tales of Symphonia, that is the one outlier. What I'm trying to get at here is that while the GameCube has never really been well known for its RPGs, and while they might not be as glamorous or nuanced as the PS2's catalog of RPGs, it still had some that stood out in their own right, and they managed to develop a very unique identity for themselves without really needing anything complex in terms of story and game mechanics. They have a handful of unique quirks about them and are kind of able to live off just that. The one thing I can say about all of these games is that they have character. Except for this one. There's just something undeniably charming about how modest these RPGs are. They reminded me of the kid-like wonder of just playing games for the adventure, no matter how big or small the place was, appreciating the more mundane types of settings, because the very few cool things or structures that you saw that stuck out in those places were the most you had back then. Or maybe even the feeling of not knowing what to expect from a game when it wasn't any of the other things you were quite used to in the others. Card game RPG sounds really lame on paper, but the way it's executed can make all the difference. Obviously, I'm not saying simplicity is always better than highly ambitious titles. It just feels like nowadays everyone is trying to dazzle you with their ambitious projects and such. Everyone is trying to be super. And when everyone's super, you start to appreciate how modest games like the ones in the GameCube's library can be, while still being fun. It's like choosing between an elaborate chocolate cake or a fruitcake for your birthday. As a kid, you'd probably lean more towards the chocolate cake, but today, I'm personally leaning more towards the fruitcake, not gonna lie. On some days, that's all you really need. Fruitcake and a nice, cozy, relaxing RPG.